Hi, everyone. My name is Breeyn Mack, and I'm the Senior Director of Educational Content here at Teaching Strategies, and I'm joined by Clarissa Martinez, who is our Dual Language Content Manager, and we're excited to spend some time with you this afternoon. Before we jump in, though, I want to take some time to go over a couple of the logistics. So you'll want to check the audio setting on your computer, but it's looking like a good bunch of you can hear us. But your speaker volume settings is where you'll want to check if you are having any audio trouble hearing us. And then if you're still having any trouble, we found that it can be helpful to just refresh your browser. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little bubble there for questions that many of you have already responded into. This is where you can submit your questions throughout the webinar. We'll do our best to answer as many of the questions as we can when we'll protect some time here at the end of the call. So feel free to pop those in there for us. And then finally, an on-demand archive of this presentation will be available in the next week or so, at which time you'll receive an email that will have a link to the webinar and instruction on how to access that archive. All right, so let's jump right in. So as I mentioned, I'm joined today with Clarissa, and her and I are both excited to have the opportunity to talk with you today about informational text and share some strategies for meaningfully integrating these texts into your classroom environment and different ways to weave them throughout the daily experiences that take place in your program. Our work as content developers, we're always looking at state standards, and as we look to these standards across the country, over the past couple of years, we've definitely seen where students and standards in K-12 are focused more and more on children spending time interacting with informational texts, more so than they have in the past. For instance, Sue Pimentel, who was one of the lead authors of the English Language Common Core Standards, talked about in her development work. She shared that, we know students as they get into college and career readiness, that most of them are, most of their reading will be informational texts, and that we know when students get into this space, it's really critical for them to be able to handle a range of complex informational texts. The National Association of Scholars explains that it's important to increase the reading of nonfiction for information in order to do a couple things, to build the knowledge and vocabulary of students, to enable them to comprehend increasingly complex texts over the grades, and also to help make children more capable of gleaning and writing about information from such texts as they're expected to do in the marketplace and college, rather than just about themselves. So none of this comes as a surprise to anyone here on the phone. It makes sense. We know that as we progress in school and in our careers, we need to interact more fully with informational texts to be successful and engaged in our work. Think about all the things that you've read in the past 3 days, not just the times that you've set aside for pleasure reading, which hopefully over a long holiday break, you were able to do some of that, but the reading that you just did in your everyday routines. So think for a minute and really think about it, and jot down a quick list on a Post-it that you have near you or a scrap sheet of paper, and think about, even just today, what were some of those things that you read? And if you feel open to it, you could share a couple of them in your in the chat box, so that we can see what others have been looking at. My slide's stuck here. Let me see. Go. If I think about just today so far for me, I've read and followed a recipe for making chili this morning in my new Instant Pot. And then I realized that I also first had to read the directions on how to even turn on my new Instant Pot, because it's definitely taking technology and cooking to a whole new level for me. I looked at movie times schedule for this weekend as I was trying to coordinate getting together with some girlfriends. I read the reviews of a children's performance that's happening at a local performance center here to see if it would be appropriate to take my 2-year-old daughter next month. And that was all before I even got to work, where literally every text I've interacted with this morning has been informational, from blog posts to my calendar schedule to others' calendar schedules, to even reviewing some research preparing for the webinar. Clarissa, do you want to share a bit of the text that you've interacted with today?
Sure. Yeah, my little nephew said he wanted some kind of a toy, and I'm at the age now, and he's at the age now where I have no idea what he's talking about. He says words that I don't even know what they are. So I had to go online to find out what in the world this toy was and what is it supposed to do. So I spent a good time this morning looking at online reviews trying to figure it out.
You're such a good aunt. It's a shame that you didn't do that prior to Cyber Monday shopping. You would maybe gotten a little bit of a better deal.
That's what I was thinking.
I'm finding some of these toys can get kind of pricey that nieces and nephews are interested in.
Yes.
I'm seeing from quite a few of the participants, we've got a bunch of different things here. Street signs, political information about the things that are happening right now, directions on how to print from my phone. Oh, goodness. I would
Nice.
love for someone to send that to me. Sarah,
Yeah.
if you'd like to post those directions to us. I didn't even know I could print from my phone. Emails, newspapers, text messages, personal calendars, daily devotions, Netflix Christmas movie schedules, dance class tonight, and getting some text information about that. So this is all around us, right? As adults, it's a big part of our everyday experiences. And we wanted to pause a moment there just to acknowledge that we as adults, continuous learners, know that this informational text is absolutely a part of our everyday lives. Nonfiction books and other informational texts that we talked about are how we learn new concepts and find answers to our questions. Some informational books, which isn't so much what we talked about here, but are structured as stories, right? While others are not meant to always be read entirely, but are meant to be used as a reference tool. But in a world where we can get all kinds of information about pretty much anything with just a few taps of the screen on our mobile device, and now I know I can even print it, which is cool, it's no wonder that we're seeing increased expectations for children's knowledge in navigating this kind of text. Research tells us that for children to be ready for career and college success, they must have a richer foundational knowledge of how to interact with and acquire information from informational texts. It's been one of the larger shifts that we've seen in recent years, as I mentioned, of state standards related to reading, writing, and speaking, being grounded in evidence from text, but now really articulating that means both literary and informational. The rigor of literacy standards in the K-12 years are expecting that children will build skills to use evidence from text to present careful analysis, well-defended claims, and clear information. Rather than asking students questions they can answer solely from their prior knowledge and experience, standards call for students to answer questions that depend on their having read a text with care. Drawing heavily from student experience and opinion alone is not going to prepare students for the demands of future success with literature. So what does this mean for a preschooler? We want to engage children in experiences and investigations that, while of course rooted in concepts that they already have prior knowledge of, offer opportunities for them to expand their ideas, find answers to their questions, and then test their predictions. So that's why teaching strategies, the creative curriculum is built around these project-based investigations of topics that are relevant to children's everyday lives. Like in preschool, we highlight things like balls, trees, clothes, exercise, bread, signs. And in our kindergarten solutions, looking at investigating things like grocery store, seeds, percussion instruments. There are many benefits to this kind of investigative learning for children. There's flexibility in learning depending on children's interests related to this wide variety of topics. There's experiences and interactions that are driven by children's ideas and questions related to these topics. Exploration, discovery, and hands-on learning about topics that are really relevant and accessible. Studies of these topics encourage just the kind of interactions with informational text that we've been talking about in ways that are actionable and meaningful for a preschool or kindergarten age child. And content-rich nonfiction is a powerful resource to help children build knowledge of the world around them, build their vocabulary, and build on their positive approaches and confidence in using text to learn information, both in a group setting and also starting to nurture them to be able to do that independently.
So for those of you who are already familiar with teaching strategies, you'll know that our assessment solution Gold and our comprehensive creative curriculum are both rooted in 38 research-based objectives for development and learning that address the development of the whole child, birth through third grade. And that for the purposes of our conversation today, let's take a closer look at a couple of the language and literacy objectives. So let's take a look at 9A, which uses an expanding expressive vocabulary. So if we take a closer look at the beginning part of the progression, this is for even the youngest babies from 0 to 2 or 3 years old. You can see that the very first things we expect for babies to be able to do is to vocalize and gesture to communicate, because we know that human beings are born communicators. That is our job. We are, even in utero, we're learning to hear and distinguish the sounds that we hear around us. And we know that even young babies, the youngest babies, will be able to understand their mother's voices and understand their mother's language more than someone that they haven't heard for 9 to 10 months in utero. So at the very beginning, we expect babies to be able to vocalize and gesture to communicate. And then as they get a little older, they're able to name familiar people, animals, and objects. And as they grow a little bit older into the preschool years, they're getting a little bit more fluid with their ability to express themselves. So by the time they're in preschool, 3s and 4s, they're able to describe and tell the uses of many familiar items. So they can tell you how to use that gadget that they want for Christmas, and they know exactly how to reset a phone if they need to. Somehow these children are very, very good at naming and describing uses of many things. And then as they get a little older, they're able to incorporate new, less familiar or technical terms. And then, yeah, that's great. And then when they get into the the early elementary years, they're really getting into incorporating new grade appropriate words. And if we notice here in the indicator under number 10, it says acquired through text and conversations. So we know it's really important for children to be able to use informational text, but also through their conversations, talking about what it is that they're seeing in their environment. And then as they get into first and second grade and third grade, then by the time they're in third grade in the brown color band for 14, it says incorporates new grade appropriate words, uses conversational and academic words and phrases, and correctly uses abstract nouns. So the language gets very sophisticated from just vocalizing and gesturing all the way up to the third grade skills. But they can't do well in third grade skills if they haven't had that basic foundational acquisition in the early years, which is why we're here. So let's take a look at another progression. This one is 18C, retells stories and recounts details from informational texts. And again, you can see the difference here. It does go from birth through third grade, but if we take a look at the very earliest part of the progression, this is not something we expect the youngest babies to be able to do. The red, orange, and yellow color bands, that's for the first 3 years of life. So the first 2 years, we don't expect them to be able to retell events. But by the time a child is 2 to 3 years old, they're going to be able to retell some information from a familiar story. So that's when they start retelling you the story of the 3 little pigs that they've heard a million times, something that they really enjoy. And then they're able to also tell you about things in their lives. So this is we look at the middle part of the progression, which is the preschool years. They're retelling familiar stories, recounting informational text in the proper order, and they're including a little bit more details. So by the time they move into kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, at the end of the progression, you can see the indicator language gets much more complex and longer because we expect them to be able to paraphrase, to summarize, and use some of those higher order thinking skills to really analyze text, to make arguments and support their thinking. So again, all of the things that we expect a third grader to do has its foundations in the very beginning of the early childhood years, being exposed to informational text in a meaningful way, so that they are building on these skills to take into first, second, and third grade. All right. So switching gears a little bit, one misconception that sometimes arises when I'm out in the field training teachers about how to best support preschool and kindergarten children to successfully acquire these skills, it stems from a bit of a misunderstanding out there about the guidance in the reading framework provided by the National Assessment of Education Progress. So this framework that informs guidance and standards like Common Core and other ones provides scaffolded percentages of the ratio of fiction and nonfiction text children should engage with from grades K to 12. So they're building from a 50-50 percentage all the way up to a 70-30 breakdown in those final years of school leading up to college and career readiness. So what's important to articulate here about this guidance is that it's referring to the collective text that children are exposed to throughout the day. So this guidance is reflective of text across learning domains and content areas. So social studies, science, the arts, physical education. And I've had conversations with teachers in the field who are committed to seeing their children set up for success in kindergarten and beyond. And so they've interpreted the guidance to mean that 50% of their read-alouds should be nonfiction text, and that's just simply not the case. When we think about this guidance and how it impacts the work we do in preschool and kindergarten, it's important to see it as more of a call to action around the kinds of text we're engaging children with outside of read-aloud experiences. What are we intentionally putting in our classroom environment that encourages children to interact with informational text in meaningful ways throughout the classroom and throughout the day?
Thanks, Clarissa. I think that's a really valid point and something I often have conversations with teachers in the field. So to shift gears into some specific strategies to start doing this, let's first talk about the role of the teacher in really promoting an understanding about these books and other texts that Clarissa mentioned in the objectives that she reviewed. So first, the teachers need to prepare an environment rich with children's literature from a wide range of genres, right? So this includes fiction, nonfiction, poetry, wordless books, counting books, the classics, right? They intentionally teach concepts about books and help children understand that information, and ideas can be found in many different types of text. So let's review a few strategies as we describe in the foundation of the creative curriculum. So the first is to use a variety of genres when you read with children. We want to give children experience with picture books, including folk and fairy tales, poetry, and informational books. So use the variations in the style of text that you share to call attention to the way ideas are presented in different ways in various types of books. We can discuss how books in the classroom library are the same and different. Part of encouraging the integration of knowledge and ideas is guiding children's ability to describe the relationship between illustrations and the text in which they appear, and also to begin identifying basic similarities in and differences between two texts on the same topic. So for instance, we can support growth in this area by engaging children in conversations about what they're seeing in the books that they're reviewing, right? So how are Eric Carle's illustrations in The Grouchy Ladybug different from the photographic images we see in the Insect Encyclopedia? How are they the same? Why would some authors want to use photographs instead of hand-drawn illustrations to tell their story? How does that choice help us learn different kinds of information? How are the books organized? And this one has a table of context, and this one has an index. How can we use those? How are they helpful to us? Next, we want to include high-quality children's literature and nonfiction text throughout the classroom. Children benefit from experience with the rich language of books, beautiful illustrations, and stories that help them learn concepts and information about the world. When young children have experience with different genres of books, they begin to understand that language is structured differently for various purposes. The language of print is usually different from that of conversation and from what honestly is heard on television these days. Written language is often more complex and abstract, and it makes different demands on the reader. The language of books usually has more formal grammatical structures and is more descriptive than casual speech. Vocabulary tends to vary more in books than in children's conversations. The language of children's books is also structured to help children attend to the sounds of language in ways that ordinary conversations don't. For all of these reasons and more, it's important for us to be thoughtful and intentional with the kinds of texts and literacy experiences we're sharing with children in our programs. In addition to reading these high-quality books to children, we want to make the books and other texts available in interest areas and learning centers where children can interact with them in the context of their play. We'll talk a bit more about how to do that specifically with informational texts in a few minutes. We also want to talk about using books as sources of information. We want to support children in learning strategies for searching for information to answer their questions in nonfiction texts. If a child sees an interesting insect on the playground and wonders what it might be, you can refer to an encyclopedia or book about insects. Together, look in the index to find the relevant page number. Read the information to the child and discuss the picture. Discuss what additional information that they'd like to find out, or what information they think is important to share with the rest of the class. If through your interactions with children on the playground, across from a construction site, you observe that a handful of children are really interested in those big machines, but are really unsure about what those different machines do, well, then we want to locate books related to construction and add them to the collection of books for children to read or even bring outside for reference as they're observing. By matching books to children's interests, you're building on children's natural curiosity and increase their interest in interacting with texts to gather that additional information. Nonfiction books are a wonderful way to introduce children to new ideas and information that will extend their vocabulary and language about topics that go beyond just the here and now.
Thanks, Breeyn. So here are a couple of intentional teaching experiences from our collection that address the kind of skills and abilities needed to meaningfully engage with informational text, because we know this is not something that comes to us as easily as just reading a read-aloud fiction book. Here's one called Asking Questions. You can see here on the screen. It supports children in developing their skills in asking questions, researching the teacher, researching the answer, and sharing their findings. So let's take a look at it. When you see the experience here on the screen, you'll notice that we've got asking questions, and underneath that it says, what do you do? And then it's got a little box sharing what materials you need for the experience, and then it kind of lists out the instructions for how to do the experience. So what you're doing here is you're really setting up the stage to help children think about questions and finding ways to ask questions that are related to their wonderings. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see it says including all children, and that is where we really highlight ways to make this more adaptable for children with special needs or for children who are dual language learners. So anytime you see including all children, that's a way of literally including all the children in the classroom, and just some different strategies there. And if you see anything on that list that's got a double asterisk, that is for children who are dual language learners. So if we click through, here we go, and at the bottom we've got a teaching sequence. So what this does is it scaffolds the experience in different ways for different ages of the children. So you can see based on the yellow, green, blue, purple color bands, you can see how it progresses from the yellow, which would be the 2 to 3-year-old, to the green, which is 3 to 4 or preschool, pre-K, and then the kindergarten is purple. So you can see how you can start at one level if you know that's where the child is, but then maybe you want to stretch them a little bit and scaffold up to the next level and interact with them on that level. Or you can do this with a small group and have children at different levels all participating in the same activity, but the way you're interacting with them depends on what level they're at. So the teaching sequence really helps to support teachers to individualize. All right, so let's take a look at encouraging children to become authors and illustrators and to produce different types of print materials. And again, we've got another intentional teaching experience right here on the screen. You can see author and illustrator. So in kindergarten, children will be asked to participate in shared research and writing projects where they use a combination of drawing, dictating, and writing to compose informative or explanatory texts, naming what they're writing about and supplying information about a certain topic. So we can absolutely begin doing this in meaningful ways in the preschool classroom. Together as a class, we can make all kinds of informational books, picture dictionaries, using photographs from the classroom to share with new students and families, or we can make alphabet books featuring different types of environmental print. We could make informational how-to books on some of our favorite games or class favorite recipes or even some yoga poses. Maybe we even want to make a songbook of some of our favorite tunes that we can share with families. Let's talk next about promoting children's general knowledge of the world by providing opportunities to use various informational texts in their play. So observe children and brainstorm ways of adding literacy materials to extend their play. Offer children many forms of print, such as menus, cookbooks, dictionaries, coupons, empty product containers, manuals, magazines, newspapers, schedules, brochures, catalogs, and of course offering paper, pencils, and markers everywhere they are. So when these materials are woven into the children's everyday experiences in the context of how they'll typically use, their purpose becomes clearer and more meaningful for children. One of the most impactful ways to do this is by placing informational text throughout the classroom where children can refer to as they play. So let's take a look at some ideas for incorporating informational text throughout some of the interest areas and not just the library area.
Thanks, Clarissa. Let's start with the discovery area. I know for me as a teacher, this was usually the easiest area to think about engaging children with informational texts, right? The discovery area is often where children first learn to use informational books as resources to find answers to their questions. In a study of trees, we have a table with lots of different types of leaves spread out, available for children to explore and investigate. And then, of course, we've got those resource books that children can use to identify the different types of leaves, their names, and the kinds of trees from which they derive. But we can really do more here, right? We can read the weekly weather forecast in the newspaper to see what the projections for rain will be, to help make a schedule for watering our garden planted outside the window. We can review directions on seed packets and learn which of our seedlings need direct sun and which only need partial sun, and chart and track that information. We can refer to the directions and materials lists that come in our box for putting together a wooden bookshelf made from the wood of trees. When we think about the dramatic play area, like all interest areas, this is one that should evolve over the course of the year. We suggest, of course, that in the first weeks of school that the area is used to reflect a living space, like a kitchen or a living room. Creating these touches of home make the space familiar to the children and helps reinforce messages in the environment that the classroom is a safe and comfortable space from which they can explore and share their big ideas. So things like dishes, tablecloths, family photos, baby dolls are all examples of items that children are already familiar with and can easily use to help take on different roles in their play. But when the dramatic play area is a home, we can also think about adding informational text that would make sense. Things like cookbooks, carry-out menus from local restaurants, or even an appliance manual for a blender. But then after those first few weeks of school, the dramatic play area really should transform to reflect different settings. It's intentional that in the creative curriculum, we call it the dramatic play area and not the kitchen or housekeeping area. This interest area should evolve throughout the year to reflect children's interests and encourage them to engage in socio-dramatic play across many different areas of study. And then these shifts in dramatic play area provide a wonderful opportunity to weave in all kinds of different informational texts that can really be meaningful to children's play. So for instance, in a study of clothes in my classroom, the dramatic play area became a laundromat. Signs are displayed with step-by-step directions on how to use the washing machine and dryer. A poster on the wall shares the survey results found by the class as they were investigating in the discovery area, which soap worked best, liquid, bar, or powder soap. And then just like in the real laundromat that we visited on a site visit, there might be a rack of magazines for children to read while they're pretending to wait for their clothes to dry. But then when we moved into a study of exercise, the dramatic play area became a fitness center. Informational charts are posted on the studio walls that label the different muscle groups of the body and depict stretches that can be done to strengthen them. A calendar of classes offered is posted at the entrance for children to see which class and instructor they wish to sign up for. Flyers might be available to talk about the important safety reminders that are necessary when exercising, hydrating, stretching, wearing a helmet. Clarissa, why don't you talk to us about music and movement?
Sure. So looking at music and movement area, the children often can explore sheet music. They can look for patterns in the notes to replicate with their instruments, or maybe there's a display of pamphlets from the local art center or concert venues talking about their upcoming events and offerings, or a classmate's program from a recent trip to the ballet, where we can see pictures of the performers and read the names of the songs that were performed, and look to see if we can find them on iTunes. So outdoors, we don't ever want to forget about the outside area. Teachers are often looking for ideas to reinforce content learning in their time spent outside. Informational texts offer a great opportunity to do just that. Field guides about birds and insects can be laminated and kept in a mailbox for children to retrieve and reference to identify new creatures that they find on the playground. And traffic signs like stop, yield, and sharp turn ahead offer informational environmental print that children can incorporate in their games outside with bikes, cars, and the creation of obstacle courses. The options really are limitless once you make informational text part of your intentional planning. So for instance, in the block area, children can explore real blueprints and use them to model or recreate floor plans in a study of buildings. And in the toys and games area, children reference the directions to a new game with the teachers, and they use a marker to highlight the important pieces of information, like how many cards does each player get, so that later the children can revisit the directions to play the game independently without their teacher. In the sand and water area, children can look at labeled diagrams of a dam or a watermill to get ideas about the functionality of their creations. And in the art area, children can explore photographs and biographical information about artists and illustrators and learn more about their work and gain inspiration themselves as artists on new techniques. So placing informational text around the room, as we've mentioned here, encourages children to interact with text independently outside of a teacher-led interaction. So when we provide both fiction and nonfiction books in various interest areas, children are empowered to find the information they need and discover the different purposes in print. You also don't want to forget to stock the interest areas with writing materials as well, so children can express their ideas and findings by drawing and writing, which are of course important skills needed for future success in life and in school. And these are just a few of the ways you can add informational text throughout the interest areas in your classroom for children to engage with during choice time. But there are also many opportunities to incorporate meaningful interactions with informational text throughout your other daily routines.
Let's take a look at large group. I used to like to start my morning large group on Mondays with news. I'd invite the children to bring in newspaper or magazine clippings that they thought the class would find interesting. I, of course, had conversations with families ahead of time of the kinds of stories that would be appropriate for sharing in our classroom community. The cover of the Washington Post, probably not. But articles about a new baby gorilla being born at the zoo, or a fossil that was found in a nearby quarry, an announcement about a new park being built in the neighborhood, those were all the kinds of appropriate and engaging topics that would be really exciting to learn about and discuss in the classroom. One child brought in an article from his uncle about a hot dog eating contest in Coney Island where he lived, where the winner ate 61 hot dogs in 10 minutes. we decided that that would make our stomachs very upset. And being that we had also recently seen an article a few weeks ago about a pie eating contest, we wondered why there were only contests about sometimes foods and not ever any contests about everyday healthy foods. Like, where was the strawberry eating contest or the salad eating contests? Most times we wouldn't read the whole article as a large group. Rather, the children would hold up the article for the class and then paraphrase for their classmates what the article was about and what they found interesting and exciting. For some children, I would have preliminary conversation during morning routines to make sure that they were feeling comfortable in sharing the story or what role they wanted me to play in sharing that story with them if they weren't as comfortable. This weekly routine also proved to be a great exercise in building family partnerships as children and families were engaged in reading nonfiction together at home and was hearing feedback from families that they were having really great discussions around the dinner table and heading out the door to school as a family about what the child's classmates might find interesting. Reviewing these articles also raised awareness of the kinds of information that was shared in newspapers. Several times throughout the year, children would work together to then create newspapers themselves for information about what we were learning in our investigations so that we could share that with other folks in our school building and our families. So think for a moment about all the informational text that you reference in a day, which we've talked about earlier, and think about that you reference as a teacher in the classroom, right? Think of all of the bits of informational text that you're looking at, and consider challenging yourself to not only model that you use informational text in your work, but engage children in the process as well, right? Bring them alongside for that. So for example, your program probably has thresholds on weather that inform how bundled up children need to be or how long the group can stay outside depending on the temperature outside. So as part of your morning large group routine, you could print out the page from the weather site or pull it up on your iPad or smartboard and invite a weather helper to not dress the weather bear, but instead to help you review those projected temperatures for your outdoor time. If we know at noon we're going outside, let's see what the temperature will be at noon on the weather projection. If there's rain in the forecast for the afternoon, as a group, compare the time of the projected rain with the time listed on your daily schedule and see if it's possible to reorganize the schedule so that outdoor play can happen earlier in the day before the rain starts. This is also a great way to leverage your smartboard and other pieces of digital technology. If the sky is starting to look a little gloomy that we're observing out the window, then I can quickly pull up a weather site and watch the pattern of the wind and rain and see how what you're seeing outside matches the weather map and make predictions of what's to come and then respond to those predictions later. So lots we can do there in our group meetings. Meal times are also another opportunity to engage children with informational texts. When preparing for lunch or snack, invite children to reference a posted menu for the day. You could have a menu helper as one of your jobs that partners with you or a co-teacher to review the menu and then communicate that information to the rest of the class so they know what's going to be served that day. Or if you have any allergies in your classroom, you can model for children how you diligently read the ingredients on a pack of graham crackers looking for the word peanuts. And then invite your snack helper to look for that word with you. First looking just for words that begin with the letter P in the ingredient list. And then when you find one, looking to see if the other letters in the word match those in the word peanuts. Clarissa, I'll let you talk about read-alouds for a couple minutes.
Thanks. So, and I apologize if I'm echoing a little bit. I'm trying to move my speaker around and my microphone a little around. So reading reading aloud is a primary way to enrich children's vocabulary and their oral language. So as children listen to storybooks, informational books, and poetry, they hear words that are new, interesting, and less common than words they hear in ordinary conversations. Reading to children also introduces book language, which is usually more formal, complex, and abstract than language heard in everyday conversations. So we want to expose children to this kind of book language across genres. As we mentioned earlier, it's so important that children are exposed daily to powerful pieces of literature that engage them in analytical discussions around character motivations, solving social problems, and the meaning of really rich vocabulary that's really best found at this age in sophisticated picture books. We actually just delivered a webinar a couple of weeks ago where we dug into strategies related to engaging children in engrossing analytical book discussions as part of a repeated read-aloud strategy in preschool and kindergarten classrooms. But we also wanted to use this webinar to stress the impact that sharing a nonfiction book in a large group read-aloud can have on creating a great foundation for profound conversations about a shared topic of learning. So let's think about rest time. Not all children need to sleep during rest time. And so offering these children the opportunity to look at books while others are sleeping is a strategy that we see used often in preschool classrooms. Don't forget to have nonfiction books as part of the classroom library to choose from for rest time. There are often a lot of details in nonfiction books, especially those with fascinating photographs that can help children sustain their attention for longer periods of time. And what a great opportunity to have children share what they've learned from the books they viewed during rest time when the class comes back together for the large group.
Thanks, Clarissa. The last kind of time of day to talk about is related to departure. So at the end of the day, large group meeting, we often have discussions with the children about what we learned that day, right? What new information do we have that we want to share with families? What predictions did we test? What results or discoveries did we share? What are we excited to learn more about? So we want to invite children to record those responses on chart paper, and then you can display it in the hallway for families to read with children during those departure routines. This allows children to generate their own informational text by recalling information from texts we interacted with, as well as experiences and investigations that were taking place in the classroom. Not only did doing this in my classroom give children the experience to communicate their ideas in shared writing format, but it also provided a nice moment to reinforce the home to school connection by giving families something really specific to talk about with their children on the way home from school. So in the to kind of bring it all together here, in the first webinar of this series that Clarissa mentioned we delivered a few weeks ago, we talked a bit about the different components of literacy, which I've got pulled up here. And for the sake of not being redundant, we won't revisit all of them. But while nonfiction texts still absolutely touch on all of these components in the ways that we addressed in our conversation last month, nonfiction also brings some unique advantages to some of these components of literacy. So for instance, research tells us that oftentimes young boys prefer informational texts and will actually engage and sustain interest longer in books that provide nonfiction and informational information. Nonfiction text allows us to introduce vocabulary that's oftentimes directly associated to a topic of investigation or that builds off of children's inquiry in an impromptu, authentic way. That's vocabulary that's going to matter to a child and is much more likely to become part of their expressive vocabulary when it's directly connected back to their particular interest or question. Informational text, also when we're thinking about knowledge of print, that informational text is often provided in a variety of different formats, right? And this can increase children's knowledge of print and inspire their own creative use of print as they look to share their discoveries, whether that be in webs or labels or diagrams of their observational drawing. It can bring a whole different layer to exposure of what print and its uses are. So in summary, right, this idea of a rich language and literacy program, which we've been talking about in this series, building that rich program for the children you serve is really strongest when you provide a wide range of experiences and opportunity for children to engage with text in general in meaningful ways, right? But when we're intentional in planning of materials and resources, you can set the stage for really authentic use of informational text that will make a lasting impression on children's confidence as they engage with all text, both literary and informational. So we'll pause there for a minute to see what questions folks have and things that we can dig a little deeper into. So just a reminder, that question box on the right-hand side of the panel is where you can pop in any questions that you might have. I know we got one question kind of earlier on that was talking about the teacher just being frustrated with seeing so many children picking up an iPad instead of a book. So I think, hopefully some of the strategies that we've provided today help support that. But I think one of the biggest one is you modeling as the educator and the adult learner, how you engage with informational text. And yes, there are things that are handy in technology, but there's lots of other rich information that we can find in books and in those printed pieces of literature. So I think really showing excitement and interest yourself as an adult learner, and then also encouraging families to do that and providing that informational text and resources for them to take home and share with families to help build some more of what that excitement may look like.
Breeyn, I wanted to share that recently I had my mom go through our attic, my childhood home, and dig out our old encyclopedias.
Oh.
Because I remember as a kid loving the encyclopedias and just poring over them to see all the kind of cool pictures they had. So I really think that if we bring back some of that old school books, those are still an endless source of fascination for kids, looking at the neat pictures.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Clarissa, that as I was kind of outlining what we talked about today, I had thought about, but then we didn't really touch on, is, sometimes there's I know I felt it as a teacher, a void of age-appropriate nonfiction out there that really meets kind of our requirements of what high quality looks like in nonfiction, or just even in books in general that we're bringing into the classroom. It's why, honestly, at Teaching Strategies, we've created so many of our own nonfiction titles to support the study work, because as we look to source titles, we just couldn't find enough out there that we felt like was really developmentally appropriate for the preschool and kindergarten space. So we've created some of our own, which you can take a look at. But I also want to encourage teachers to think about things like these encyclopedias that Clarissa's talking about. All of the text in there may not be age appropriate or developmentally appropriate, but think about the conversations that you can have by looking at the photographs and looking at the labels that are there and summarizing what some of the text is. So definitely is a place where you could bring in informational text that may not be geared towards the preschool age child, but still has some really, really vivid and interesting diagrams, photographs, illustrations to help facilitate conversation. And that's, as Clarissa was talking about, those progressions of interacting with text. That's a really great opportunity in the preschool classroom. I wonder how much of that information would be outdated, Clarissa, in the encyclopedias.
Very true.
Okay, so we've got all of a sudden a bunch more questions here that have come over. Give me 1 second here. Oh, so this teacher was just saying that she enjoyed this webinar and uses informational text often because she is a technology-free classroom. So I'm sure she has a lot of great strategies for incorporating that. So we've got someone here who's a family child care provider who's just talking about having limited space and putting up posters in other places. I would say, every surface, especially of children, are a part of creating these diagrams and these bits of informational text that you could get creative of where you're posting this information, and on the back of chairs or the back of table, hanging from a table as everyone's sitting around to engage with. I remember I did that once as a teacher, that we pulled all the chairs away and I had just taped posters around the edge of the table to almost do like a little gallery walk. So I would say just have children be part of that solution too, of thinking of creative places where you could display their work. Some of the other questions we're getting are pretty specific to particular programs. Again, there will be a copy of the presentation that will be emailed to you. So since you registered for the webinar, you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the archived version.
So I see a question about how to get children to choose books more independently and gravitate using books as a source of information. And again, I think that goes back to what Breeyn was saying, that it's about the way we model it. So if we see an interesting bird outside on, out in the play area, then rather than going online to go look for that bird or just say, that's an interesting bird, actually digging out a book and modeling to the children how you can use a table of contents, maybe flipping through to see the pictures, see how they're arranged until we find the one that kind of matches. It takes certainly a bit more time than just taking a picture and doing a Google image search. But I think that's how we start to develop these skills and this awareness that books contain all this great knowledge and information, and just showing the children how to get that information.
And I think the lovely effect of that, Clarissa, too, is that it inspires children to then create their own informational texts and books of, gosh, we couldn't find this information specific to our building or specific to our classroom or schedule, so let's make our own.
Yeah.
So we'll pause here for a minute to see if there's any other questions. All right. Well, we'll just wrap up there then. And thank you again so much. We know how unbelievably busy all of you in the field are, and we really appreciate you joining us for this conversation. And we have a webinar. The next one in the series is going to be really reevaluating our library area. So definitely look for information when you can join us in a conversation to rethink the library area and the materials we provide there. All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.